Hook/Scene, January 17th, 1943. The night hung heavy over the Solomon Islands. Waves lapped against jagged reefs, carrying the faint hum of distant engines. Japanese soldiers crouched among dense jungle undergrowth, their eyes straining to pierce the inky darkness. The scent of salt, gunpowder, and wet earth filled the air. A faint flicker appeared on the horizon, a pattern too precise to be ordinary. Across the dense canopy, faint signals blinked on small screens in hidden American posts. On the islands, radar operators traced every movement of approaching ships and planes, unseen by the enemy. For the first time, the Japanese troops felt an unsettling awareness. Something was watching them, calculating, predicting. Offshore, silhouettes of U.S. destroyers and cruisers shimmered in the moonlight. Radar pulses sent invisible waves across the water, revealing Japanese troop movements and supply vessels before they even realized they had been detected. Panic mixed with disbelief rippled through the ranks. "How could they know?" whispered one officer. This invisible network, humming quietly beneath the night sky, would soon rewrite the rules of engagement. Every step, every approach, every daring maneuver was now observed. The Japanese soldiers, trained in stealth and precision, were stunned. They could see the Americans, but they could not touch them. Not yet. The tension lingered, heavy and unbroken, as dawn promised to illuminate a new reality of war. Context/background, Part 1. By early 1942, the Pacific War had already claimed vast swathes of territory. Japanese forces had seized the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, and much of Southeast Asia with remarkable speed. Their naval and air power dominated the region, and American forces were reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor just months earlier. The U.S. Navy, depleted and disorganized, faced the daunting task of slowing an opponent who had perfected rapid amphibious assaults and combined arms operations. Every island, every strait, and every reef became a potential battleground in this vast, watery theater. Amid the chaos, American military planners realized that conventional reconnaissance was no longer sufficient. Traditional scouting methods, lookouts, patrolling ships, and aircraft could not provide the speed or precision required to counter Japanese movements. The U.S. Navy and Army Signal Corps had already begun experimenting with a new technology. Radar, radio detection, and ranging offered the promise of observing enemy movements beyond visual range, at night, and even through adverse weather. By 1942, radar units were being deployed on strategic islands, aircraft carriers, and battleships throughout the Pacific, creating a network that could detect approaching Japanese forces hours before visual contact. Japanese military doctrine, on the other hand, was steeped in confidence. Many officers believed that dense jungle terrain, coupled with night operations, would mask their movements. They underestimated the scale of American industrial and technological mobilization. To them, the notion that an invisible eye could sweep the seas and skies with unerring accuracy seemed almost supernatural. The first practical applications of radar in the Pacific began on islands like Guadalcanal and Tulagi. Small, often concealed posts housed operators who monitored oscillating screens and listened to the hum of radar transmitters. Each blip represented ships or aircraft, sometimes dozens at once, providing commanders with real-time intelligence. American officers quickly learned how to use these early warnings to plan airstrikes, position ships, and coordinate defensive fire. At the same time, Japanese forces continued their expansion, relying on aggressive tactics and surprise attacks. They had yet to encounter the reality of electronic surveillance at this scale. Their initial assaults, calculated to overwhelm small garrisons and supply points, were increasingly met with resistance. Radar detection allowed U.S. forces to anticipate movements, disrupt supply lines, and strike first in a theater where the margin between victory and defeat was measured in hours, not days. Every radar post added to a growing network that stretched from island to island. Operators developed protocols for interpreting signals, differentiating between aircraft types, ship classes, and formation patterns. What was once invisible, the approach of enemy destroyers or reconnaissance planes, was now quantifiable and trackable. The Japanese, confident in their operational secrecy, remained unaware of how much the Americans could see. These early deployments of radar marked a turning point in the Pacific theater. They demonstrated not only technological ingenuity, but also the strategic vision of American commanders who understood that information could be as lethal as firepower. By mid-1942, radar had become a force multiplier, providing early warning, guiding intercepts, and even directing naval artillery with unprecedented accuracy. For the Japanese soldiers encountering this invisible adversary, the implications were staggering. They could no longer move with impunity, no longer assume the cover of night or jungle would conceal their presence. Radar, quiet and unassuming, began reshaping engagements across the Pacific. It was a silent predator, invisible yet omnipresent, and it would soon define the battles that lay ahead. Context/background, Part 2. By mid-1942, radar technology had matured enough to become an integral component of American defensive and offensive operations across the Pacific. The U.S. Navy deployed a variety of radar systems. The SG radar for surface search, capable of detecting ships beyond the horizon. The SC and SCR 270 radars for early warning of incoming aircraft, and specialized fire control radars mounted on battleships and cruisers to direct gunnery with near-perfect precision. Each system was painstakingly calibrated to the unique challenges of island terrain, dense jungle, and the unpredictable Pacific weather. American engineers faced logistical challenges in transporting heavy radar units to remote islands. Generators, antennas, and delicate receivers had to be shipped hundreds of miles, often under the constant threat of Japanese submarines or air attacks. Once installed, teams of operators worked in shifts around the clock, scanning oscillating screens and monitoring faint blips that represented enemy movements. Accuracy improved rapidly, and commanders soon learned to integrate radar information with traditional reconnaissance reports and signals intelligence. The combination allowed U.S. forces to anticipate Japanese operations before the enemy had even committed to action. Japanese assumptions about night operations and stealth were shattered by these deployments. On islands such as Guadalcanal, Japanese troops attempted to advance under the cover of darkness, only to find that U.S. radar posts were already tracking their every movement. In naval engagements, Japanese pilots and ship crews were stunned by sudden interceptions, often with American fighters vectoring in from unseen directions, guided entirely by radar data. The precision and timing of these counterattacks created a psychological shock. Soldiers and officers began to doubt their own intelligence and reconnaissance capabilities. Radar did not operate in isolation. It became a force multiplier within a broader system of technological and tactical innovations. Radio communications allowed radar operators to relay critical information to commanders in real time. Aircraft carriers coordinated with shore-based stations to launch intercepts, while destroyers and cruisers adjusted their formations to optimize fire coverage. Even supply convoys benefited, as radar screens identified potential ambush points and enemy reconnaissance planes. Japanese planners, however, remained largely unaware of the scale of the American advantage, often attributing setbacks to luck or superior numbers rather than unseen technology. By late 1942, the effects of radar were evident across the Pacific theater. The Battle of Guadalcanal, in particular, showcased its strategic value. Japanese attempts to reinforce positions on the islands were repeatedly detected and disrupted. Supply runs by destroyers, previously assumed to be invisible in darkness, were intercepted or evaded at the last minute by U.S. forces who had foreknowledge of their approach. For Japanese soldiers on the ground, the realization was humbling. Their movements were no longer private, their operational secrecy compromised by invisible eyes in the jungle and on the ships. The combination of technology, training, and operational foresight transformed American defensive and offensive strategy. Radar allowed smaller American forces to punch above their weight, offsetting numerical disadvantages with precision and anticipation. Commanders began planning battles around radar's capabilities, timing air sorties to coincide with blips on the screen and coordinating ship movements that maximize detection ranges. Every engagement reinforced the perception that the Americans were not merely responding. They were anticipating, dictating the flow of combat, and shaping the battlefield from afar. This emerging reality set the stage for the encounters that would define the Pacific War. Japanese forces, though formidable, were increasingly reactive. Each shock, each failed maneuver, reinforced the growing belief among their ranks that they were facing an opponent who could see and strike from beyond the horizon. The stage was set for the angles of human experience, tactical innovation, and technological mastery that would culminate in pivotal battles of 1942 and 1943. Angles, Part 1. Angle 1. Technological superiority. Radar was more than a machine. It was a paradigm shift. American engineers had spent years refining the systems that now silently pulsed across the Pacific, converting electromagnetic waves into actionable intelligence. Operators could distinguish between aircraft types, track ships at night, and predict approach vectors with remarkable accuracy. During naval engagements, radar-directed fighter interceptions allowed U.S. pilots to meet Japanese aircraft hundreds of miles from American positions, often before the enemy even realized they were being observed. On Guadalcanal, early warning radars detected approaching bombers in time for anti-aircraft guns to prepare, drastically reducing potential damage. For Japanese soldiers, encountering such precision for the first time was disorienting. Their traditional reliance on visual scouting and radio interception seemed suddenly outdated. The invisible network of detection forced Japanese commanders into reactive postures, surrendering the initiative to the Americans. Radar became a force multiplier, turning limited U.S. resources into an overwhelming tactical advantage. Angle 2. Human experience. For the Japanese soldiers hidden in jungle foliage or aboard ships, radar's impact was psychological as much as tactical. They were trained to move under cover of darkness, to avoid observation. Yet every step seemed anticipated. Reports from intercepted communications reveal repeated shock among officers realizing that their movements were being tracked, yet unable to locate the source. Night operations, once a cornerstone of Japanese tactical doctrine, became fraught with unseen danger. Many soldiers described a growing unease, a sense of being hunted by an unseen observer. Conversely, American operators, working in cramped, hot bunkers, experienced intense focus and camaraderie. Every detected blip represented both a threat neutralized and a life saved. The contrast of human experiences, terror for the observed, confidence for the observer, underscored the profound strategic impact of radar beyond mere numbers and weaponry. Angle 3. Tactical innovation. Radar enabled new forms of coordination that were impossible in previous conflicts. Destroyer formations could maintain optimal spacing, anticipating enemy approaches, while aircraft carriers vectored fighters precisely to intercept Japanese bombers. Shore-based radar stations on islands like Guadalcanal and Tulagi provided early warning that allowed anti-aircraft batteries to be pre-sighted and ready. Tactics shifted from reactive engagement to proactive interdiction. Japanese pilots, trained in aggressive, visually oriented maneuvers, found themselves repeatedly intercepted or disrupted. Naval commanders began documenting radar-based interception as a core tactic, planning battles around the timing of radar detection rather than traditional visual spotting. This shift reshaped engagements across the Pacific, giving Americans a decisive edge in both surprise and precision. Angles, Part 2. Angle 4. Leadership and command. American commanders quickly recognized radar's potential to transform strategic decision-making. Admirals and island garrison leaders relied on real-time intelligence to coordinate movements across hundreds of miles of ocean. Vice Admiral Frank J. Fletcher and Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner, among others, integrated radar data into operational planning for airstrikes, naval bombardments, and troop deployments. Commanders could now anticipate Japanese maneuvers rather than merely respond. This foresight allowed smaller U.S. forces to punch above their weight, preserving resources while maximizing damage to enemy supply lines and formations. Japanese officers, meanwhile, were forced into reactive strategies, frequently adjusting plans mid-operation as American radar-directed attacks disrupted schedules. Leadership success became increasingly dependent on understanding, interpreting, and acting on this invisible advantage. Angle 5. Enemy perspective. Japanese soldiers and commanders were consistently stunned by the effectiveness of radar-guided American operations. Reports from Guadalcanal and Solomon Islands campaigns describe officers in disbelief as their reinforcements were intercepted before reaching beaches or supply convoys destroyed at night. Pilots flying reconnaissance missions found themselves vectored into traps by unseen American fighters. On the ground, infantry units moving through jungle paths discovered that their positions had been detected before they could establish defensive lines. This constant surveillance eroded confidence and morale. Japanese forces, previously accustomed to controlling the tempo of engagements, now faced an opponent that seemed to anticipate every move, leaving them stunned, reactive, and increasingly vulnerable. Angle 6. Strategic and moral implications. Radar's impact extended beyond immediate tactical gains. It reshaped entire campaigns, reducing casualties among U.S. forces while maximizing enemy attrition. Soldiers and commanders began to view technology as a force multiplier, proving that industrial capacity and innovation could decisively alter the balance of power. Morale on both sides shifted accordingly. American troops gained confidence from the ability to predict enemy movements, while Japanese soldiers struggled with the psychological toll of being constantly observed and outmaneuvered. The moral dimension became apparent. Technology was not just a tool, but a safeguard, preserving lives while imposing strategic inevitability on an unprepared adversary. Radar redefined both the conduct and ethical calculus of warfare in the Pacific theater. Climax/turning point, Part 1. The early months of 1942 had set the stage, but it was the battles of Guadalcanal and the surrounding Solomon Islands that showcased the transformative power of radar. On the night of August 7, 1942, U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and Florida Islands. The Japanese had anticipated a minor confrontation, assuming American forces would struggle to establish beachheads under dense jungle cover. What they did not anticipate was the network of radar stations already in place. From hidden coastal bunkers, operators tracked the movement of Japanese patrol ships and reconnaissance planes, providing commanders with a continuous, unseen advantage. At sea, American destroyers and cruisers used SG and SC radar to detect Japanese warships approaching under cover of darkness. Radar-directed fire allowed U.S. gunners to engage enemy vessels before visual contact, a capability that stunned Japanese naval officers accustomed to night fighting as an arena where they dominated. Japanese destroyer squadrons, attempting to resupply and reinforce the islands, were intercepted in the pre-dawn hours. Torpedo launches failed to reach American vessels, while gunfire, guided by radar, struck with unnerving precision. Officers aboard Japanese ships recorded their disbelief, noting in operational logs that enemy fire seemed to anticipate every maneuver. On land, Japanese soldiers advancing through jungle paths were similarly disoriented. Their movements, previously invisible under cover of dense foliage, were observed and relayed to American units. Artillery emplacements adjusted positions in real time, intercepting Japanese columns before they could consolidate. Pilots arriving for support missions found themselves vectored into ambushes by radar-guided fighters. The combination of land, sea, and air radar coordination created a layered defense, one that forced Japanese commanders into defensive reactions rather than offensive control. By October 1942, these engagements reached another critical point during the Battle of Cape Esperance. Japanese cruisers and destroyers moved to reinforce Guadalcanal, believing they could exploit darkness and surprise. Yet American radar picked up their approach long before visual sighting. Task Force 64, commanded by Rear Admiral Norman Scott, launched a night interception with precision guided entirely by radar tracking. Torpedo spreads were evaded, ships repositioned, and American gunners directed fire with unprecedented accuracy. Japanese forces were shocked, ships were disabled, and retreat became inevitable. This was not luck. It was a demonstration of intelligence, technology, and coordination converging to dominate the theater.